The crystal chandeliers sparkled like frozen waterfalls above the crowded ballroom. Women in designer gowns glided across the marble floor, while men in tailored suits discussed business deals over expensive champagne. This wasn't just another party. This was the kind of evening where fortunes were made with a handshake and reputations were built with a smile. David Sterling stood near the entrance, greeting guests with practiced charm. At 32 years old, he had everything most people dreamed of. The mansion he inherited from his father, a real estate company worth millions, a collection of sports cars that could make anyone jealous. But more than anything, David loved being the center of attention. He loved throwing parties that people would talk about for months. Tonight was special. It was his annual charity gala, and over 200 guests had paid $1,000 each just to walk through the door. The money would go to some cause his event planner had chosen. David didn't really care about the details. What mattered was the impression, the spectacle, the proof that he belonged among the city's elite. His phone buzzed in his pocket. David pulled it out and saw a message from his event coordinator. His smile faded as he read the words. The pianist had been in a car accident. Nothing serious, but he couldn't make it. David's jaw tightened. He'd spent weeks promoting this evening, and the live piano performance was supposed to be the highlight. People expected elegance. They expected perfection. He texted back quickly asking if there was a backup. The response came seconds later. No backup. Everyone else was booked. David shoved the phone back into his pocket and forced his smile to return. He couldn't let the guests see him stressed. Rich people could smell weakness like sharks sensing blood in water. The evening continued despite the setback. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays of appetizers. The bar was surrounded 3 people deep. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings, but David couldn't stop glancing at the grand piano sitting silent in the corner of the room. It was a Steinway, worth more than most people's houses, and tonight it was just an expensive decoration. He downed another glass of wine, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. His friends gathered around him, the usual group of trust fund kids and young executives who shared his taste for excess. They joked about their latest purchases and mocked people who weren't in their circle. This was David's comfort zone. This was where he felt powerful. That's when he noticed her. She was wearing the standard uniform of the house staff. Black pants, white shirt, black vest. Nothing fancy. Nothing that would make her stand out in a room full of people wearing clothes worth thousands. Her name was Rosa, and she'd been working at the estate for about 3 months. David barely knew anything about her except that she was quiet, efficient, and invisible in the way staff were supposed to be. But right now, Rosa wasn't being invisible. She was standing near the refreshment table, supposedly arranging the dessert display, but her eyes weren't on the food. They were locked on the piano across the room, and the look on her face made David pause. It wasn't just interest. It was hunger, the kind of longing you see in someone staring at something they've lost. Her fingers moved slightly at her sides as if they were remembering something her mind was trying to forget. For just a moment, Rosa's professional mask slipped, and David saw something real underneath. Then his wine-soaked brain produced an idea, a terrible, hilarious, perfect idea. He leaned toward his closest friend, speaking just loud enough to be heard over the music. His friend's eyes widened, then crinkled with amusement. The idea spread through the group like wildfire. Within minutes, 5 of them were grinning like schoolboys planning a prank. This was going to be the story of the season. This was going to be the entertainment they needed. David straightened his tie and walked across the ballroom. His friends followed at a distance, trying not to laugh too obviously. Other guests started to notice the movement. Conversations quieted, heads turned. David loved an audience, and now he had one. Rosa looked up as he approached. Her professional smile appeared instantly, the kind service worker's perfect after years of dealing with demanding employers. She set down the dessert plate she'd been holding. "Good evening, sir. Is there something you need?" Her accent was noticeable, but her English was clear. David's grin widened. This was going to be even better than he thought. Rosa, isn't it? He made a show of remembering her name, though he'd had to ask the head of staff earlier. "Yes, sir." "Rosa, we have a bit of a situation tonight." David gestured toward the piano with exaggerated drama. "Our pianist couldn't make it. Car trouble. Very disappointing. And I noticed you looking at the piano earlier. You seemed quite interested." Rosa's face changed slightly. The professional smile tightened. Her shoulders tensed. She knew something was coming, but she couldn't refuse her employer. Not if she wanted to keep her job. I was just admiring it, sir. It's a beautiful instrument, it is, isn't it? David raised his voice slightly, making sure more people could hear. The room was getting quieter by the second. Cost me more than most cars. Seems a shame to let it sit there unused all night. So here's what I'm thinking. Why don't you play something for us? The color drained from Rosa's face. Around the room, guests stopped their conversations entirely. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked amused. Everyone understood what was happening. The rich man was putting the help on the spot. It was cruel. But it was the kind of cruelty that happened often enough in their world that most people just looked away. Sir, I don't think that would be appropriate. I'm working tonight. Oh, come on. David spread his arms wide, playing to the crowd. Consider it part of your job. Entertainment. Besides, you were staring at it like a kid looking at candy. Don't tell me you can't play even a little bit. His friends laughed right on cue. A few other guests chuckled nervously. Rosa's hands gripped the edge of the table behind her. Her knuckles went white. Sir, please. I'm just here to work. But David was committed now. He'd started the joke, and backing down would make him look weak. He needed to see it through. He needed the story, the laughter, the social media posts his friends would make later. I insist. His voice was still friendly, but there was steel underneath. The tone every boss learns when they want something done. Just one song. How hard could it be? Unless you're scared. The room held its breath. Rosa stood frozen, trapped between refusing her employer and facing public humiliation. Her eyes darted to the exits, to the other staff members watching with sympathy and relief that it wasn't them, to the piano that had caught her attention in the first place. Finally, slowly she nodded. If you insist, sir. David beamed. Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our entertainment for the evening. Scattered applause broke out. Though many guests still looked uncomfortable, Rosa set down the napkin she'd been holding and walked toward the piano. Each step seemed to take forever. Her uniform looked even plainer against the elegance of the instrument and the room. David's friends already had their phones out, ready to capture what they assumed would be an awkward, embarrassing attempt at music. Rosa reached the piano bench and sat down carefully. She adjusted her position slightly. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling just enough that people in the front could see. The room was completely silent now. 200 people watching one woman about to become the punchline of a joke she never asked to be part of. David leaned against the bar, wine glass in hand, waiting for the entertainment to begin. Rosa's fingers touched the keys. And for a moment, nothing happened. The silence in the ballroom was so complete that people could hear their own heartbeats. David took another sip of wine, already imagining how he'd tell this story at lunch tomorrow. His friends were practically vibrating with anticipation, phones held steady to catch every awkward second. Then Rosa pressed down on the first key. The note that came out was pure and clear. Not tentative, not searching. It rang through the massive room like a bell. Before anyone could process what they'd heard, her other hand joined in. Then both hands began to move across the keyboard with a speed and precision that made several people gasp out loud. She was playing Chopin, Ballad No. 1 in G minor, and she wasn't just playing it. She was performing it like someone who had lived inside the music for years. David's smile froze on his face. His wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Around the room, the laughter died so quickly it was like someone had flipped a switch. People who had been recording on their phones slowly lowered them, forgetting entirely that they were supposed to be capturing something funny. Rosa's hands flew across the keys with impossible grace. Her fingers struck each note with exactly the right pressure, the right timing, the right emotion. The opening melody was delicate and haunting, and she played it like she was telling a story that only she knew. Her eyes were closed now, and her whole body moved slightly with the rhythm of the music. The easy parts came and went. Then came the difficult sections, the parts that separate amateur players from professionals, the parts where most people's fingers would stumble and the music would fall apart. Rosa didn't stumble. She didn't hesitate. Her hands moved faster, dancing across black and white keys like they were born to be there. Complex runs that should have taken years of practice flowed out of her effortlessly. David pushed away from the bar, standing up straight. The smug expression had completely disappeared from his face. He looked like someone who had just opened what they thought was a closet and found an entire cathedral on the other side. His friends weren't laughing anymore either. One of them had actually put his phone away, too stunned to remember to keep filming. The music swelled, filling every corner of the enormous room. It bounced off the high ceilings and wrapped around the crystal chandeliers. It made the marble floors seem to vibrate with emotion. Women who had been sipping champagne set their glasses down, afraid they might drop them. Men who had been checking their stock portfolios on their phones forgot the devices existed. Rosa's face had transformed completely. The nervous, frightened expression was gone. The professional mask she wore as a staff member had vanished. In its place was something raw and real. She wasn't in the ballroom anymore. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere the music had taken her. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her hands never faltered. If anything, they seemed to play with even more feeling. The piece moved through its emotional journey. Gentle moments that sounded like whispered secrets. Powerful sections that felt like storms breaking over mountains. Rosa handled all of it with the kind of mastery that made it look easy, even though everyone there knew it wasn't. This was years of training. This was natural talent refined into something extraordinary. This was art. David felt something unfamiliar and deeply uncomfortable settling in his chest. Shame. Real shame. Not the fake kind he'd performed at business meetings when he needed to seem humble. He had meant to humiliate this woman. He had invited her to play as a joke, expecting her to embarrass herself while he and his friends laughed. Instead, she was revealing him. Every note she played showed how small his cruelty had been, how blind he'd been to see only a maid instead of a person. The music reached its climax, Rosa's hands moving so fast they blurred. The sound built and built, layer upon layer of melody and harmony weaving together into something that made several guests openly cry. Then gradually it began to soften. The storm passed. The whispers returned. And finally, with one last lingering note, the piece ended. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence after the music was almost as powerful as the music itself. Rosa sat at the piano bench with her hands still resting on the keys, her eyes still closed, tears still wet on her face. Then the applause started. It began with one person clapping, then another, then suddenly the entire room erupted. But this wasn't polite applause. This wasn't the kind of clapping people do at charity events because they're supposed to. This was real. People were on their feet shouting, cheering like they'd just witnessed something they'd never forget, because they had. Rosa opened her eyes slowly as if waking from a dream. She looked startled to see 200 people standing and applauding for her, confused like she'd forgotten where she was. She stood up from the bench awkwardly, still wearing her staff uniform, still clearly unsure what to do with this reaction. "More!" someone shouted from the back of the room. "Play another one." The crowd picked up the chant. "More, more." They wanted more music. They needed it. That one piece had shown them something their money and status could never buy. Real talent. Real passion. Real soul. Rosa looked overwhelmed. She glanced toward David, still standing by the bar, still frozen in place. Their eyes met across the room. And in that moment, they both understood exactly what had happened here. He had tried to make her small, and instead she had made him feel microscopic. She turned back to the piano and sat down again. The crowd quieted immediately, eager for whatever came next. Rosa placed her hands on the keys once more, and this time there was no trembling. She launched into Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. If the Chopin had been beautiful, this was something else entirely. It was fierce, powerful. Each note hit like a declaration, like someone announcing to the world that they existed, that they mattered, that they would not be ignored. David watched her play, and for the first time in his privileged life, he understood what it meant to be truly humbled. This woman he barely noticed, whose name he had to be reminded of, was more talented than anyone he'd ever met. She had more real value in her little finger than he had in his entire body, and he had almost destroyed something precious tonight. He had almost turned her gift into a joke for his own amusement. Around him, his friends were silent. The people who had been ready to laugh and record and mock were now transfixed. Some of them looked ashamed too. Some of them looked angry at themselves. The phones that were supposed to capture humiliation were now capturing genius. and several people were already posting videos with captions about witnessing something miraculous. Rosa finished the Rachmaninoff piece to another explosion of applause. Before the crowd could demand more, an elderly woman pushed her way through the mass of people. She was small, maybe 70 years old, with white hair and elegant clothing. She moved with purpose, her face pale and shocked. "Stop," the woman said, loud enough to cut through the applause. "Everyone stop." The crowd quieted again, confused by the interruption. The elderly woman reached the front and stood staring at Rosa, with an expression that was half disbelief, half recognition. Rosa stared back and slowly her face went white. "I know you," the elderly woman said, her voice shaking. "I know exactly who you are." The ballroom felt smaller suddenly, like all the air had been sucked out. Rosa stood up from the piano bench so quickly that it scraped against the floor. Her face had gone from pale to completely white. She looked at the elderly woman like she was seeing a ghost. "Mrs. Chen," Rosa whispered. The name came out barely loud enough for anyone to hear. The elderly woman took another step forward. Her hands were shaking. "Rosa Mendez, I thought you were dead. We all thought you were dead." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something bigger was unfolding. David moved forward too, no longer the host of the party, but just another person desperate to understand what was happening. Mrs. Chen reached out and touched Rosa's arm, as if checking that she was real. "Where have you been?" Mrs. Chen's voice cracked with emotion. "It's been 15 years. 15 years, Rosa, what happened to you?" Rosa's lips trembled. She looked around at all the faces staring at her, at the phone still recording, at David standing near the back with guilt written across his face. She seemed to be deciding something. Whether to run, whether to lie, whether to finally tell a truth she'd been hiding for over a decade. "I had to leave," Rosa said finally. Her voice was stronger now but filled with old pain. "I had no choice." Mrs. Chen turned to address the crowd, her voice taking on the authority of someone used to commanding attention. "This woman," she said, pointing at Rosa, "was one of the most talented students I ever taught, and I've taught at Juilliard for 43 years. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Juilliard, one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. People exchanged glances, trying to reconcile the maid in the staff uniform with a Juilliard student. "Rosa came to us from Mexico," Mrs. Chen continued. "She was 19 years old. She'd learned piano in her village from an old teacher who recognized her gift. When we heard her audition tape, we knew immediately. Full scholarship, housing included. She was going to be a star." Rosa's tears were falling freely now. She didn't try to hide them or wipe them away. David felt his shame deepen with every word. He'd thought she was nobody. He'd thought she was just the help. He'd been so monumentally, catastrophically wrong. "She was months away from her debut performance," Mrs. Chen said. "We had agents interested. Recording companies. She was going to perform at Carnegie Hall. And then one day she just disappeared. No goodbye. No explanation. Her roommate found her dorm room empty. We called, we searched, we filed missing person reports, nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. My mother got sick," Rosa said quietly. The ballroom was so silent that her soft voice carried to every corner. "Stage 4 cancer. I got the call from my brother on a Tuesday morning. The doctor said she had maybe 3 months. She paused, gathering herself. David could see her hands shaking at her sides. "I was the oldest. My father died when I was 12. I had 4 younger siblings back home. The youngest was only 8 years old. I had to choose. Stay here and chase my dream or go back and be with my mother. Be there for my brothers and sisters. There was no choice, really. Family comes first. It always comes first." "But your scholarship," Mrs. Chen said. "Your visa. Why didn't you tell anyone? We could have helped. We could have arranged something." Rosa shook her head. "My student visa didn't allow me to work. My family had no money for the funeral, for the medical bills, for food. I couldn't come back legally. And even if I could, the scholarship would have gone to someone else. 3 months turned into 3 years as I took care of my siblings. By the time the youngest was old enough to be independent, I was so far removed from that world, I thought it was over. I thought that part of my life was dead." The crowd listened, completely absorbed. These were people who had everything handed to them, who couldn't imagine giving up their dreams for anyone. They were hearing a story from a completely different world. "How did you end up here?" Mrs. Chen asked. "In this house?" I came back to the United States 2 years ago, Rosa explained. Different visa, different circumstances. I needed work, any work. I saw an ad for housekeeping staff at this estate. I took it. The pay was good and... She glanced at the piano, a sad smile crossing her face, and there was a piano here. A Steinway grand. I would come in early sometimes, before anyone woke up. I would play for 20 minutes, maybe 30 if I was lucky, just to remember what it felt like. Just to keep that part of me alive. David's stomach dropped. He remembered now. A few times over the past months he'd woken up early and heard piano music drifting through the house. He'd assumed it was a recording, background music someone had left playing. He'd never bothered to check. He'd never cared enough to investigate. I convinced myself I was happy, Rosa continued. I told myself that some people aren't meant to have their dreams. That I'd had my chance and made my choice. But then tonight, she turned and looked directly at David. The entire room followed her gaze. David wanted to disappear. He wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Tonight I was asked to play in front of all these people, and I was terrified. I knew it would expose everything I'd been hiding. But I also knew that if I said no, if I walked away from that piano one more time, I would regret it forever. So I played. And for those few minutes, I got to be who I was supposed to be, who I still am underneath everything else. Mrs. Chen wiped tears from her eyes. You never stopped being that person, Rosa. Talent like yours doesn't disappear. It's in your bones. In your soul. The elderly teacher turned to address the crowd again. I'm still on the board at Juilliard. I still have connections throughout the music world. This woman deserves a second chance. She deserves to have the career that was stolen from her by circumstance. Someone in the crowd started clapping. Then another person joined in. Within seconds, the applause was thunderous again. But this time it was different. This wasn't applause for entertainment. This was applause for courage, for sacrifice, for a story that reminded everyone in that room that there were things more important than money and status. David stood frozen as people surged forward to talk to Rosa. Business cards appeared from pockets and purses. A concert promoter, a recording studio owner, a talent agent. People who had come to his party to network and make deals were now offering Rosa opportunities she'd thought were lost forever. One of David's friends approached him, looking uncomfortable. Did you know? He asked. About her background? David shook his head. I didn't know anything about her. I didn't ask. I didn't care. His friend winced at the honesty. They both watched as Mrs. Chen wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to Rosa. A phone number, probably. A promise. A door opening after 15 years of being closed. We really messed up, his friend said quietly. We were going to humiliate her. Post videos online. Make jokes. I know, David said. The shame was overwhelming now, a physical weight in his chest. I know exactly what we were going to do. Across the room, Rosa caught his eye again. She excused herself from the crowd surrounding her and walked over to where he stood. David braced himself for anger. For accusations. For the public calling out he absolutely deserved. Instead, Rosa stopped in front of him and did something completely unexpected. She smiled. David stared at Rosa, completely confused by the smile on her face. He had expected anger, accusations, maybe even a slap across the face that he would have fully deserved. But a smile? That made no sense at all. I need to thank you, Rosa said. David's mouth opened, but no words came out. Behind him, his friend made a choking sound of disbelief. Thank me? David finally managed. I tried to humiliate you. I invited you to play as a joke. I wanted you to fail in front of all these people so we could laugh about it. I know, Rosa said simply. I knew it the moment you asked. I've worked in houses like this long enough to recognize that look in someone's eyes. The honesty of it hit David like a punch. She'd known. She'd known exactly what he was doing, and she'd walked to that piano anyway. Then why are you thanking me? Rosa glanced back at the crowd, at Mrs. Chen talking animatedly with a group of people, at all the opportunities suddenly swirling around her like leaves caught in wind. Because I was hiding. I'd been hiding for 15 years. I'd convinced myself that my life as a musician was over, that I needed to accept my reality and stop dreaming. I was too scared to do anything about it. She turned back to David, and her smile was sad but genuine. You forced my hand. You put me in a position where I had to choose between walking away from music one more time, or finally letting people see who I really am. Your cruelty gave me the push I was too frightened to give myself. David felt like he should say something profound, but his mind was blank. The wine he'd drunk earlier had left him with nothing but a dull headache and crushing guilt. I don't deserve your gratitude, he said quietly. No, Rosa agreed. You don't? But I'm giving it anyway because something good came from something bad. That doesn't make what you did right. It just means that sometimes life surprises us. Before David could respond, Mrs. Chen called Rosa back over. There were more people to meet, more hands to shake, more possibilities to explore. Rosa gave David one last look, then walked away to rejoin the crowd. David stood there feeling smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. His friend nudged him. That was weird. That was Grace, David corrected. That was her being a better person than I'll ever be. The party continued, but it had transformed completely. Nobody cared about networking anymore. Nobody was talking about business deals or stock prices. Everyone wanted to talk about Rosa, about her story, about the performance they'd just witnessed. David's carefully planned charity gala had become something he'd never intended. Something real. Over the next hour, David watched from a distance as Rosa's life changed in real time. Mrs. Chen made phone calls right there in the ballroom, speaking to people in New York and Los Angeles. A woman who owned a string of concert halls offered Rosa a performance slot. A man who produced classical music albums wanted to discuss a recording contract. Someone else mentioned a documentary crew that would be interested in telling her story. Rosa looked overwhelmed by all of it, but there was something else in her expression too. Hope. Real hope. The kind that comes from doors opening after years of being shut. Around midnight, the crowd finally started to thin. Guests left with stories they'd be telling for years. David's event coordinator approached him with a confused expression. Sir, several guests are asking about making additional donations. They want to set up something for Rosa, a fund or scholarship or something. I wasn't sure what to tell them, David thought for a moment. An idea was forming, a way to maybe do something right for once. Tell them I'll match whatever they donate, dollar for dollar. We'll set up a fund for musicians who've had to interrupt their education or careers due to family emergencies. Get the details from Mrs. Chen tomorrow. The coordinator nodded and walked away. It wasn't redemption. David knew he couldn't buy his way out of what he'd tried to do. But maybe it was a start. Maybe it was better than doing nothing. By 1 a.m, only a handful of people remained. Rosa sat at the piano again, but this time she was alone. She wasn't playing. She was just running her fingers along the keys gently, like she was saying goodbye to a friend she might not see again. David approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. You can come play anytime you want, he said. The piano. It's here if you need it, Rosa looked up at him. That's kind of you, but I don't think I'll be working here much longer. Mrs. Chen has already offered me a place to stay in New York while we figure out the details of everything, and there are rehearsals to prepare for, recordings to make. My life is about to get very busy. Right, of course. David felt stupid for even suggesting it. Rosa stood up and faced him directly. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you do it? Why did you want to embarrass me? David had been dreading this question, but he owed her honesty. Because I could. Because I thought it would be funny. Because I've spent my whole life thinking that having money made me better than other people. I was bored and cruel, and I didn't see you as a real person. I saw you as entertainment. The words tasted bitter in his mouth, but they were true. Do you know? Rosa asked. Now I see what I've been blind to my whole life. That the most extraordinary people are the ones I've been overlooking. That worth has nothing to do with bank accounts or job titles. That I've wasted 32 years being someone I'm ashamed of. Rosa studied his face for a long moment. Shame is only useful if it changes you. If you feel bad but keep living the same way, then it's just self-pity. But if you let it transform you, if you become someone different because of it, then maybe it serves a purpose. I want to change, David said, and he meant it. I don't know how, but I want to be better. Then start by seeing people, Rosa said. Really seeing them. Everyone you meet has a story. Everyone has dreams and struggles and talents you know nothing about. Stop assuming you know everything about someone based on their job or their clothes or their accent. She picked up her vest from the piano bench, the staff uniform she wouldn't be wearing much longer. I need to finish my shift. There are dishes to clean and tables to clear. Even on a night like this, the work still needs to be done. You don't have to, David said quickly. I'll pay you for the full night. Go home, rest, process everything that just happened. Rosa shook her head. I finish what I start. It's how my mother raised me. She walked toward the kitchen, leaving David alone with the piano and his thoughts. He sat down on the bench where she'd been sitting and placed his hands on the keys. He pressed one down experimentally. It made a sound, but it was just noise. There was no music in it, no life. He didn't have the years of practice, the natural gift, the dedication it took to make these keys sing the way Rosa did. David's phone buzzed. Messages from friends who'd been at the party. Videos were already going viral online. Millions of views in just a few hours. The comments were overwhelming. People calling Rosa an inspiration. People sharing their own stories of sacrificed dreams. People asking how they could help or where they could see her perform next. His own social media was blowing up too, but the messages there were different. People calling him out for trying to humiliate Rosa. People who'd figured out what his intentions had been. His reputation was taking a hit, and for once he didn't care about managing it or spinning the story. He deserved the criticism. One message stood out though. It was from his event coordinator. Several media outlets want interviews. Should I tell them no comment? David stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, tell them the truth. Tell them I made a terrible mistake and learned something important. Tell them this isn't my story to control. It's Rosa's. Direct everyone to Mrs. Chen's contact information. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he stood up from the piano bench and went to help the remaining staff clean up the ballroom. They looked at him strangely. The owner never helped with cleanup. But tonight, David picked up champagne glasses and cleared plates like everyone else. 6 months passed like a dream. Rosa kept expecting to wake up from. The video of her performance had reached over 50 million views across different platforms. News outlets ran stories about the maid who turned out to be a musical genius. Talk shows invited her for interviews. Strangers recognized her on the street. It was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Mrs. Chen had moved mountains to make things happen. Within 2 weeks of that night, Rosa was back in New York with a small apartment near Lincoln Center. Within a month, she was rehearsing 6 hours a day, rebuilding the technical skills that had gone rusty during her years away. Her fingers remembered more than she'd expected, but there was still work to do. So much work. The fund that David had started, matched by donations from party guests and then thousands of strangers online, had grown to over $2 million. It was being used to help other musicians who'd had to abandon their training due to family emergencies or financial hardship. Mrs. Chen administered it personally, making sure every dollar went to someone who needed it. Rosa's younger siblings were able to join her in the United States legally now, sponsored through a visa program for family members of people with extraordinary abilities in the arts. Her brother was studying engineering. Her sisters were in high school, thriving in ways they never could have back home. Everything Rosa had sacrificed for was finally paying off, not just for her, but for all of them. But the biggest moment was still coming. Carnegie Hall, one of the most famous concert venues in the world. Rosa stood backstage in a dressing room that felt too fancy to be real. She wore a deep blue gown that Mrs. Chen had helped her pick out. Her hair was styled by professionals. Her hands were shaking. 5 minutes, Miss Mendez, a stage manager called through the door. Rosa stared at herself in the mirror. Somewhere in Mexico, her mother was watching. Rosa believed that even though her mother had died 12 years ago. She was watching and she was proud. Rosa had to believe that or the grief would swallow her whole. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said. The door opened and David walked in looking uncomfortable in his formal suit. Rosa hadn't seen him since that night 6 months ago. They'd exchanged a few emails, brief and professional. He'd been nothing but supportive from a distance, never trying to take credit or insert himself into her story. "I hope it's okay that I'm here," David said. "I wasn't sure if you'd want me to come." "I invited you," Rosa reminded him gently. "You're on the guest list." "I know, but I thought maybe you felt obligated." "After everything," Rosa turned from the mirror to face him. "I invited you because I wanted you here. Not because I owed you anything. I wanted you to see what came from that night." David nodded slowly. He looked different than he had at the party. Less polished somehow. More real. "I've been going to therapy." he said suddenly. Since that night. Trying to figure out why I treated people the way I did, why I thought cruelty was entertainment. And what did you learn? That I was empty. That I built my whole identity around money and status because I had nothing else. No real relationships. No passions. No purpose. I was just this hollow person playing a role. Rosa sat down on the small couch in the dressing room. Are you still empty? Less than before, David said. I've been volunteering at a community center in the city, teaching kids about real estate and business, not because it looks good or helps my reputation, because it feels like maybe I can use what I know to help people who didn't get the advantages I had. That's good, Rosa said. That's a start. I also sold the mansion, David added. It was too big, too much, too full of bad memories. I'm in a regular apartment now, still nice but normal, and I stopped throwing those parties, stopped hanging out with those friends. Turns out when you're not spending money on entertainment, people drift away pretty quickly. Rosa could hear the loneliness in his voice, but also something else. Relief, maybe, like he'd been carrying something heavy and finally put it down. I'm sorry I invited you to play that night, David said, his voice thick with emotion. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know I mean it. What I tried to do was cruel and small and wrong. You deserved better. Everyone deserves better. I know you're sorry, Rosa said. I forgave you a long time ago. Not because you earned it, but because carrying anger was too heavy. I had enough to carry already. 2 minutes, Miss Mendez, the stage manager called. Rosa stood up and smoothed down her gown. Her heart was racing. Out in the concert hall, 2,000 people were waiting. Critics from major newspapers. Musicians she'd admired her whole life. Her siblings in the front row, Mrs. Chen beside them, and somewhere in the crowd, David would be sitting in the back watching the woman he'd tried to humiliate achieve her dream. Will you be at the reception after? Rosa asked. David shook his head. I don't think that's my place. Tonight is yours. I'm just grateful I get to witness it. Rosa walked to the door, then paused and turned back. You know what the hardest part of these past 6 months has been? What? Believing I deserve it. Believing that I'm good enough to be here. I spent so many years being invisible, being overlooked. That part of me still expects someone to realize they made a mistake. To tell me I need to go back to cleaning houses and forget about pianos and concert halls. But you are good enough, David said firmly. You're more than good enough. You're extraordinary. So are a lot of people, Rosa said. That's what I've learned. The world is full of extraordinary people doing ordinary jobs because life didn't give them the right chances. That's why the fun matters so much. It's not about me. It's about all the others who have talent and dreams but no opportunity. 1 minute, Miss Mendez. And Rosa took a deep breath. I should go. Rosa, David called as she reached for the door handle. She looked back at him. Thank you for teaching me to see people. Really see them. It changed my life. You changed your own life, Rosa corrected. I just played piano. She walked out of the dressing room and down the corridor toward the stage. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it. This was the moment she'd been denied 15 years ago. The debut that never happened. The dream that died and somehow came back to life. The stage manager gave her a nod. The curtain was still down. Beyond it, she could hear the audience settling into their seats. The rustle of programs, the quiet conversations. She walked onto the dark stage and sat at the piano. A beautiful instrument, perfectly tuned, waiting for her. The curtain began to rise, light flooded the stage. Rosa could see the faces now, row after row of people who'd come to hear her play. She found her siblings in the front row. Her youngest sister was crying already. Mrs. Chen sat beside them with her hands clasped together, looking proud and emotional. Rosa placed her hands on the keys and let everything else fall away. The nerves, the doubt, the years of struggle, the sacrifice, the pain, all of it transformed into music as she began to play. She started with the same Chopin piece she'd played that night at David's house. It seemed fitting somehow to begin where this new chapter of her life had started. But this time she wasn't playing in a staff uniform while people expected her to fail. This time she was exactly where she belonged. The music poured out of her piece after piece. An hour-long program that she'd practiced until her fingers ached. She played for her mother, who sacrificed everything for her children. She played for her siblings who'd waited so patiently for their lives to begin. She played for Mrs. Chen, who never stopped believing. She played for everyone who'd ever had to choose between their dreams and their responsibilities, and in a small way, she played for David too. For the broken person he'd been, and the better person he was trying to become. When the final note faded into silence, the audience exploded. They stood and cheered and whistled. Rosa stood at the piano, tears streaming down her face, and bowed. She'd made it. Against every odd, through every obstacle, she'd finally made it home. In the back of the concert hall, David stood with everyone else, applauding until his hands hurt. He left before the reception, slipping out into the New York night. He'd meant what he said. This wasn't his story. This was hers. But he carried something with him as he walked to the subway. A lesson, a reminder, that every person he passed on the street had a story he couldn't see. That worth wasn't measured in money or status. That sometimes the most important thing you could do was step back and let someone else shine. David would never be the hero of this story. He didn't deserve to be, but maybe, just maybe, he could be someone who learned from his mistakes, someone who became better because a woman with more grace than he'd ever have chose to teach him through her example, rather than her anger. That was enough. It had to be.